Why do they need to be doused 7 times, and to wash so much? He asked. 7's a good number, don't you think? Each bucketful cools a burn a little more, and if they're given a little time to wash in the river afterwards, they might happen upon a suitor and marry out of that stinking hole. Barnaby wrinkled his nose, finding the prospect of marriage just as revolting as the factory itself. Or a friend, for that matter, I said, or a different employer. Barnaby nodded, approving less icky methods of escape. Miasma can kill, I told him. Our bodies have noses for a reason. Will you keep an eye out, and when you see one of those girls away from the father, tell them all I've told you? He nodded once more before excusing himself to take a dip in the river himself. I could hear children's laughter drifting through the trees, and I was glad he had friends and follies suited to his age. Before I reached home, a very pregnant woman accosted me, asking for my help. Something's wrong, she said. Is it true the mayor's hired you as a healer? I was hardly going to say no to a woman in obvious distress, so instead I helped her back to the house and made her as comfortable as possible, realizing belatedly that I should have accompanied her to her own home instead. I wondered who had been telling all of Hollowvale that I was officially in Mrs. Valley's employment. They must have seen me around her home and jumped to conclusions. Can you tell me more about what's wrong? I asked the pregnant woman once we were inside. The baby isn't moving anymore, she said. All at once I was taken back to my own childhood, when mother had put on a particularly self-assured voice with a pregnant woman. I heard my own voice shift. How long since it last moved? I'm not sure exactly, she said. A day? I felt my hidden silver warm against my hip, and everything I'd ever heard mother say about such things came back to me. Excusing myself, I went to the kitchen and found some berries, honey, and tea. I then lit a smaller stove and gave her a handful of berries to eat before making her a cup of over-sweetened tea. There didn't seem to be anyone in the house at all, so I dragged out my own bedding and had her lay down on it and wait for the baby to respond to the sudden influx of sugar. I remembered mother yelling at a woman's stomach once to make her baby move, but I didn't dare try that method yet. My stomach feels wrong, she said. It's too hard, as if the baby has turned to stone. May I asked. At her nod, I placed my hand on her stomach. It did feel hard, like a skull, and it stiffened even more a moment later. The stiffening passed from one side of my palm to the other, and then spread to encompass the woman's entire abdomen. I don't know how to ask this, I said, but have you wet your personal linens recently while wearing them, and not on purpose? Her blush was answer enough. The good news is that your baby's alive and kicking, literally, and you're in labour. She closed her eyes in relief. Why doesn't it hurt? Because it's early yet, I said. It'll hurt soon enough, hopefully. Why do you sound worried? She asked. Your water has already broken and the child needs to come out. Very well, she said, regaining her self-possession in an instant. You're the healer. Make it come out. I chewed on my lower lip. The silver I carried was evidently awake and interested, but I wasn't sure how to benefit the baby directly. I advised her to stay upright to help her labour along. She paced the length of the room, puffing and sometimes groaning. I chose to believe the angry looks she shot my way were a good sign. I hope you know what you're doing, she said. Me too, I said under my breath. I heard a loud knock at the door, followed by a triumphant shout of, "So you are here after all!" Soon after, Mayor Valley swept inside, accompanied by a thin man with a top hat that made him look even thinner. She gasped at the sight of the impromptu birthing suite, but recovered quickly. "Mrs. Bonner, may I present Mr. Thwaites, our new great one?" "You've arrived just in time," said my patient, blinking back tears. "This soul-eater child is nothing but a hazard." I wished I could believe she was wrong. Mr. Thwaites brushed past me, knocking my shoulder with his. "Enough loitering here," said Mayor Valley to Miss Bonner. "Come and settle yourself in Adam's room at once." "You're too kind," says Mrs. Bonner. "So sorry to set you straight to work, Mr. Thwaites," Mayor Valley said to the newcomer. "It will be your room soon enough, so I'll have Susan put all your things in there." "Think nothing of it," he said, sparing me a glance that said he was surprised I was still present and taking up his precious space. "I know how to do my job." Within moments my unexpected guests were gone. In a daze, I walked outside for some air. Mary and I sat on the front porch one day when we spotted Barnaby running towards us, pale-faced and trembling. "Our new great one is different," he panted. "Something's wrong with him." Barnaby breathed so hard that his freckles stood out like a spatter of blood across his nose. "It's all right," Mary told him, wrapping him in her arms and ushering us both inside. "He's got no soul," Barnaby said. "No glow." The boy was speaking nonsense. A man without a soul was impossible. Mary calmed him eventually and invited him to stay in her house until he felt safe to go home. When he slept, he tossed and turned and moaned. I stayed in the Valiant household 2 more nights, recovering my health and preparing for my next journey. The Valiants told me I was welcome to stay, but I couldn't help noticing that Barnaby and I had doubled their household. On the next day I left. The Tanner family gave me Knox's pelt without requiring payment. I was lost for words, confused by such generosity. The pelt was beautifully salted and stretched. It was going to make a glorious coat. I lived in constant terror of hearing that awful Knox-like voice in my head again. Sometimes I felt sure Knox was watching me from inside my head, watching and judging everything I did as she prepared further unpleasantness.